Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to a tier list. Everybody's favorite pastime is ranking Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord factions, and today we're going to be diving in and basically just going ahead and giving my 2 cents on it with the new 1.2 update, which did change a lot about the base game. If you've seen any of the more recent time lapses on 1.2, you're definitely going to see a big difference in actual gameplay, and some factions you might not even expect to do as well as they do definitely perform above average. So yeah, this tier list is going to basically be the factions in all encompassing. It's going to be their faction as a whole, it's going to be their type of units, it's going to be their terrain, and also how well the AI performs on them. Be sure to let me know down below in the comments as well if you guys completely disagree or agree with my actual tier list. Give me your own down below in the comments as well. It'd be interesting to see where you rank all of these factions. Before we dive in though, I want to let you know that the channel has recently partnered with ExpressVPN. Are you sick and tired of the Lords of Calradia stealing your data, or annoyed that you can't get access to that latest hit Khuzaits show? And make sure to go to the description and check out ExpressVPN. They protect your data and let you change your geolocation to up to 94 countries, unlocking sites and services only available in those countries. On top of that, if you use my link in the description, you gain 3 months free when signing up for 12. Okay, let's start off with the Aseri. So as a faction as a whole, I think the Aseri are, definitely middle of the pack. They have a very good terrain advantage. They only can fight wars on basically 2 fronts, whether it's over here in the left-hand side, there is, one individual crossing, and then over on the right, you can attack from a few different directions. But again, these castles, as long as they hold, will keep the Aseri land safe. So strategic positioning, they definitely get an A+++. They have probably the best position in the entire game, minus maybe the Khuzaits, but even the Khuzaits I think are pretty well protected, and again we'll get on to why. I mean, you can see why, but we'll get on to why later on in the video. So next, actual clan setup. Again, they have some pretty decent clans, nothing too special. Really the only faction that will have a good clan advantage is Vlaindia. Don't know why, they just have more clans than everybody else, but clan wise they have a pretty decent setup. As we already mentioned, position wise they have castles defending their choke points, pretty well defended cities, so nothing to worry about there. Okay, so now let's take a look at their actual unit roster, and this is, I guess, their downfall right here. I feel like the Aseri unit roster kind of lets you down. And again, their top tier unit roster is really good. They have a pretty decent archer line. Again, these guys aren't too bad. They only have 160 bow skill, which isn't anything too special, and their armor isn't anything to write home about. It's actually pretty weak armor, but again, they're okay. They're probably middle of the pack archers, nothing, maybe even a little bit below average archers. Their infantry is fairly decent. They're equipped with a spear. They've got javelins, which I think sets them actually above a lot of the other infantries in the game. Their heavy cavalry, a menace. These horse archers are crazy, and their Mamluk guard, one of the best looking infantry in the game, and they output some decent damage. However, these top tier units aren't going to be what we're rating, because for the most part the AI is only ever going to have a handful of these units. The main strength is going to be in these tier 3s, and they're just very, very lackluster. They don't really do anything. There's no real advantage that a lot of other factions do have. And even when we get onto the tier 4s, again, their archers are really disappointing. Their infantry, their armor is just so light that it just doesn't really do much. Again, their weapon choices aren't great. The javelins are really nice. The cavalry, again, is pretty decent, especially with the new buffs in 1.2. And the Mamluk guard are okay, but shock infantry does die pretty quickly unless they're shielded by infantry. So these are kind of the ranges we're looking at, and I think it's just a big letdown. So because of that, we're gonna have to probably stick them in C tier. Again, the Aseri are one of my favorite factions just because of their whole environment. They have one of the best kind of terrain, but they just struggle in auto resolves, and the AI I always feels like they make a little bit of ground against the Western Empire and then they immediately get thrown back. Actually, no, I take that back. We're gonna stick them in B tier, and this is why. Because the Aseri, yes, they don't really take a lot of land in the game. However, I never see them get completely stomped by the AI. The AI never can push deep enough into the desert, and I think that puts them in a B tier. Their strategic positioning, great. Their tier units, their mid-tier units, just not good. So that kind of levels them out at just an average faction, I would say. Okay, next we have a controversial one, I think. We have the Battanians. And the Battanians have a very, very, I guess, daunting start. As you can see, they are surrounded by about 5 factions. We have Vlaindia to the left of them, we have the Sturgians to the north, we have the Northern Empire and the Western Empire ready to attack. So as you can see, they are surrounded by 4 different factions, all of which are pretty powerful. However, they have a pretty good terrain bonus. They are in the mountains. This is a very kind of a hard-fought area with their racial bonuses as well. They move faster in these trees, and as you can see, their entire lands are covered in trees. So this means that they can catch armies if they outnumber them very effectively and basically just fight that guerrilla style of warfare. Unfortunately, the AI doesn't utilize that massively, but even still, they have a very good terrain advantage. It's just a massive shame that they are surrounded by 4 or at least 3 very good factions and then poor old Sturgia. So I'm definitely going to have to give this a below average for strategic positioning. And then we make our way onto the unit tree. Again, the mid-tier for Battanians is just pretty disappointing. They don't really do anything. I think the Battanian skirmisher cavalry at tier 5 is actually really good. They get a lot of damage in, but everything else just isn't that good. Like this is supposed to be like a light cavalry, a maneuverable cavalry, but that just doesn't really translate very well in battle. Their Falksmen can, again, output a decent amount of damage, especially with the javelins, but they just never really kind of get stuck in the battle, and in the auto-resolve, they really do struggle. Both Sworn are very good, but again, that's a tier 5 unit. The AI, for the most part, is going to be using these trained warriors, and they're just disappointing, I would say, for the most part. And again, I know everybody's screaming at the at your computer screen right now, or TV screen, or mobile, depending on how you're watching. The Thanes! And yes, the Thanes are very good. So yeah, the noble unitary is going to be their saving grace. Battanian Thanes, the best archer in the game, probably the best unit in the game, only to kind of, I guess, compare with Imperial Cataphract. And these Thanes are pretty easy to get early on in the game and very easy to level up, because archers generally can just get tons of experience without really putting themselves at risk like the cavalry and the infantry have to. But I think even with this unit, the AI just doesn't utilize it enough. Yes, for the player, this unit is probably the best unit in the game, like I said, but the AI won't be spamming these. They maybe will have a couple, and that'll be it. So for sure, they have a below average roster, unfortunately. However, they do also get some bonuses in 1.2, which if you've seen a few of the time lapses, you'll notice that Battania do actually survive that a little bit longer in the latest beta patch, because they get a bonus when fighting in forests and in raining and in snow. That all debuffs and buffs certain units. And the major one right there is now when you're doing an auto-resolve inside of forests, cavalry get a minus 20% debuff to their strength in them auto-resolves. So when you're looking at a faction like Vlaindia, which is heavy cavalry, the Imperial factions, which again can output a lot of cavalry, that comes in, you know, they all of a sudden get 20% better against them factions. That's not too bad. But I still think it's just not enough, and they're going to probably be down here in the C tier. Oh, the Battanian Thanes would probably like rank them up. If it was just like best units in the game, then yeah, of course, S tier. But I think they're worse than the Aseri for me. Again, pre 1.2, they would get destroyed every time. Now in 1.2, they do hold their own a lot more. Their auto-resolve changes have helped massively. Just not enough though. Okay, let's do this. Khuzaits next. The Khuzaits. So the Khuzaits actually got hit pretty hard by 1.2 in the auto-resolve changes, as we just mentioned, with the 20%, I think 25% debuff for horse archers now in forests. This means that they're going to be struggling in basically all of this terrain. You can see everywhere they're fighting, there is a lot of forest. Even up here in Sturgia, tons of forest land, and they're going to be getting a debuff to their units, which they didn't have beforehand. 20 and 25% to cavalry and horse archers. Like, that's pretty big. However, they have a pretty good strategic position. Again, there's only several ways you can honestly attack the Khuzaits because of the huge lakes and rivers, which is pretty nice. You know, again, it doesn't really come into play too much. You know, the Aseri have a much better setup, but even still, you know, only being able to attack from like certain areas makes hunting down armies a little bit easier, and I'm a big fan of that. They are also only touching 3 of the factions, the Aseri, who again, for the most part, are heavily dealing with the Southern Empire most of the time. So because there's so much kind of empty terrain down here in the steppes, you're just never really going to be worrying too much. And again, that means the Khuzaits can focus on the Empire in the north and also the Sturgians. Unit roster wise, again, you can see it's heavy cavalry. Basically, you can just do a big cross down this right hand side. You don't care about anything over here. It's all about the cavalry. It's all about the Khuzaits heavy horse archers, the heavy lancers, which are really good when you're actually fighting with them. And you have the noble troop tree as well, the noble sons going all the way down to Khan's Guard. Again, probably the best cavalry unit in the game. It shoots, it slashes, it hits into people. What else can it not do? Yeah, 260 bow skill is absolutely incredible. 220 polearm, and they also have a glaive, again, the best weapon in the game. And with 1.2, even though we have been, kind of saying how bad these guys are affected in auto-resolve, actually in the battle, the cavalry AI has gotten a lot better with targeting. They've changed a lot of them, so the cavalry actually does hit their attacks a lot more. That does make melee cavalry a bit better. Clan-wise as well, I think they actually start off with one less than everybody else, right? No, they start off with the same. It's crazy how Vlaindia starts off with like 3 more clans. And you might be thinking that like one of the things they really struggle at is sieges, and yes, they don't really have the high quality infantry to storm castles a lot of the time. They can get by 1, demolishing open field battles, and 2, horse archers when they dismount and heavy cavalry when they dismount are just as deadly. So even though they lack the infantry, the cavalry dismounts and they basically do the exact same job. So I think I'm going to stick the Khuzaits in A tier. They could arguably be S tier. I think they're an A tier. Maybe we'll come back and change that to an S depending on where I put the other factions. But for now, a solid A. Okay, next we have the 3 Imperial factions, and I'm going to probably kind of talk about all of them in one go here, as they have the same unit trees with basically no differences, and it's going to kind of come down to how they really perform in the campaign and who they're facing, their strategic positioning. So Southern Empire, led by the Empress herself, I think this is probably the strongest faction, the faction I see do the best in the campaign. They generally can take care of the south very easily. Normally they would take like these 2 settlements and then just hold the line. Again, I've seen the Aseri push up and maybe take a couple of these, like Vostrum and this castle. I very rarely see them push up here, and even when the Aseri do push into to the lands to the north, they get pushed out pretty quickly. So I think that allows them to kind of end that war quickly and then focus on dominating the Imperial factions whilst they're focusing on harder opponents. I also very rarely see the Khuzaits come south. Normally the Khuzaits are busy dealing with the Northern Empire, which I think is probably the weakest of the factions. I don't know, I think it's close between these 2, but the Northern Empire normally gets ganged up on by the Southern after they finish their war with the Aseri, and then by that time they're still having a pretty hardy fight with the Khuzaits and generally lose some pretty crucial lands down here in the south. The Northern Empire again is facing the harder of the group, I would say, because they've got so many opponents. They've got Battania, they've got the Northern Empire, and they've also got the Khuzaits along with the other 2 Empire factions. So I think they're actually taking on the most factions out of anybody. However, they have some of the richest cities, like this city, which I believe is the previous throne of the Empire. Makes an absolutely ridiculous amount of money. The actual other settlements over here as well, like Daifamun, it is very expensive and you can make you so much money. This is a very good strategic settlement. Their castles and terrain are pretty well set up. This is a shame they're surrounded by basically every single faction besides the Aseri and the Vlaindians. Western Empire, again, has a pretty hard time of it. They end up getting into basically constant wars with Vlaindia, the Aseri, and Battania as well. They start off at war with Battania and they generally do take the advantage there, but as soon as Vlaindia and the Aseri kind of finish their wars and they focus elsewhere, they definitely do struggle. So I think strategic wise, the Western Empire is by far the strongest, and then maybe the Northern and Western are pretty evenly matched. Maybe the Western getting a little bit stronger, but they end up fighting stronger factions. Unit wise, they have probably the best kind of mid-tier to high-tier units in the game. The Imperial trained infantryman is great. They have javelins, they have a very good shield, and they also have some pretty decent body armor, and their actual stats are good enough as well. 70 athletics and 70 one-handed, it is good enough. And then as soon as they go up to tier 4, they get a massive upgrade with their legionary scale armor and their stats. They get a pretty good armor piercing spear as well, so if that hits you, you're basically done for. And at tier 4 as well, they get some good crossbows. Both their missile variants are very good. The tier 3 is probably a little bit lackluster compared to the infantry. I'd say the infantry is more as what you would pick. But then the higher tier options are really good. The Imperial Sergeant Crossbowmen are deadly. The Palatine Guard are amazing. Their horse archers are actually pretty decent, but again, I wouldn't bother with them. I'd just go more crossbows or archers. And then their infantry. This is the best infantry in the game, hands down, no question about it. Probably one of the best units alongside the Theans you could possibly get in the game. They're just absolutely devastating. And then again, we talk about their noble units as well. The Imperial Cataphracts, again, the best cavalry in the game, clad to head to toe in elite armor, and also have just amazing stats as well. 260 polearm is just disgusting. They have a very, very good weapon. The only thing you could probably do differently is give them like a huge glaive, and that would just cut through swathes of enemies. But yeah, these guys, this unit, the Imperial Legionaries and Theans are probably the best 3 units in the game, and the Imperial factions have 2 of them best units. So yeah, absolutely incredible. Okay, so where do we place them? This is Western Empire, I think, is an A tier faction. Their unit tree is great. It's just kind of their terrain positions, the factions of their fighting, they kind of just struggle. Next we have the Southern Empire, and I'm gonna put them in S. That's gonna be our first S tier faction. I think their unit roster is amazing, and I don't think they have a hard time with the factions they're fighting, because they're fighting the Aseri, and they're not really ever getting stuck in against the Khuzaits much. Again, they do fight some wars, but they don't really go too far, and they very rarely get ganged up on. I think they deserve to be in S. And then we have the Northern Empire, which I always see get ruined again. They get to fight Sturgia. They have very rich settlements. I'm just debating whether or not to stick them down here, but I also feel like the Western Empire doesn't do dramatically better than them, so maybe we do something like this. Like, these two could be interchangeable. I could stick them down into B. I kind of need like a B-. Maybe we'll come back and look at that when we take a look at the last factions. Okay, so now let's take a look at Sturgia. Poor old Sturgia. Even though in 1.2, cavalry has gotten a massive debuff with auto-resolve, weathers come into the game, again aiding to infantry in actual battle itself and also in the auto-resolve, and yet they still just struggle. And that's because they're fighting some of the strongest factions, and they just don't, because their land isn't really condensed, it's just this long strip. They kind of just struggle. They have the Northern Empire, again, a very strong faction. The Khuzaits, they have, they even fight the Western Empire as well through this strait. They have Battania, and they also have Vlaindia, who again have just gotten really, really good with the AI cavalry changes. I still just don't see them doing very well. Granted, in some of the time lapses I've seen, they have taken a couple castles from Battania, but hey, it's from Battania, it's not really saying much. And then normally the Northern Empire comes in, rips them apart. Vlaindia, when they amass enough soldiers, they can focus down Varcheg. I've seen them lose Varcheg multiple times, and the Khuzaits just have free reign when they're done with the Northern Empire. Actual unit tree wise though, they actually aren't too bad. I mean, again, it probably just comes down to these tier 3 units, which again are mainly used, just aren't really anything special. Even their tier 4s, yeah, their tier 4s are pretty underwhelming as well. Tier 5s are pretty good. Like, I like these pretty, I mean, even still, the heavy axemen are disappointing, even with that 50 armor on their chest pieces, which is good. I'm just pretty disappointed. I'd always go heavy spearmen and heroic line breakers. However, the heroic line breakers with 32 armor, like, what the hell is that? Why do they only have 32 armor? Against Vlaindian crossbowmen, Bannerlord Guard, Imperial crossbowmen, Khuzaits horse archers, this unit just gets torn apart. Their cavalry actually is surprisingly good. It's maneuverable, and the javelins can output a lot of damage, especially against enemy cavalry, so they do pretty good. And then their archers are, again, middle of the pack, nothing really that good. But yeah, their mid-tier line is just pretty disappointing. I feel like their tier 2s are good. Like, I like this tier 2 unit, and then it's just downhill from there. Even on their upper tiers are just very disappointing. And then, again, their noble unit, their cavalry, yeah, good. This is a decent cavalry unit. Again, the AI isn't going to be spamming these. And again, this mid-tier unit, for all intents and purposes, should just be better. I feel like they should just go with just really good infantry to rival the Imperial Legionaries. That would be the better kind of fit for them. But yeah, with that, I mean, it's just a disappointing faction, and even with the the bonuses to the auto resolve, the weather changes, they still just struggle that just too much. So unfortunately, they're going to be a D class faction. They are one of my favorite factions. I love them. It's so much fun to actually play as them, but it's always an uphill battle. And they just don't really have any redeeming faction besides playing kind of like Viking / Slavic-esque units. Like, they've got a cool aesthetic, That just does not help you in the actual game whatsoever. And then we come to Vlaindia, the people's champion, the faction that people probably enjoy the most, and that's because they've kind of got a cool, I guess this game is targeted at Western audiences, and they got the medieval feel to them. That's probably why people like them, and they also have one of the strongest starts. So strategically, really good. There's only what, 1, 2 ways in, 3 ways in, and then these this one mountain pass. So strategically, they're actually really well set up. And again, this is littered with castles. If they can take a few of these other castles as well along this demilitarized zone, as I like to call it, the Iron Curtain of Imperial castles, then they are just laughing all the way to the bank. They're only really facing like 2 major factions. The Sturgians, yes, they start a war with them, but quite quickly, like, this castle gets taken, and then they have to kind of go quite a long way to actually engage. So they end up just fighting Battania, the Empire, and then the Aseri when they push out, which is nice. So yeah, strategically, they're in such a good position. All their rich settlements are very well protected. And for some reason, look at all these extra clans. They get 3 extra clans. For what reason? Actually, 2 extra clans, because I'm currently part of them in this playthrough. They get 2 extra clans. For what reason? I don't know. You tell me. So that generally provides them with just the extra manpower they need to win the wars when they can muster them. Again, the AI sometimes struggles to get up into the positions they need to get to. When they're fighting a close war, they can, muster thousands of men very effectively. Unit roster-wise, we'll take a look at their cavalry first. Again, the Battania is a very deadly cavalry. Even better now with the 1.2 changes to cavalry AI. So it actually does some really good hit-and-run tactics. Their weapons are a little bit lackluster. Like, this knightly lance isn't actually that great. It's only a tier 3 weapon. However, their armor is incredible. 51 armor, very good leg armor along with the heavy mail, and basically if they're getting a hit anywhere else, they're going to be doing very good. Their horse is pretty good as well, the noble war mount. And if we go to like tier 3s or tier 4s in this variant, like the Vlaindia knight itself is pretty decent. Even the squire is good enough. And then the base roster, I think, is pretty decent. They get access to crossbows at tier 2, and the tier 3 crossbowmen can output a lot of damage, take out really high valuable targets. Vlaindian spearman is a little bit like, whatever, it's nothing to write home about. However, I think the other 2, you're getting access to light cavalry right away, and this lance is very good. It can take enemies out and keep them at a safe range very, very effectively. And yeah, the crossbowman is great. So yeah, these 2 definitely bump this roster up very decently. Again, the spearman, not so good. But when you get to the Vlaindian swordsman, which is decent enough, the Vlaindian infantry isn't that good. It's kind of disappointing. But again, the vanguard, which is the tier 6 cavalry, is good. But yeah, the hardy crossbowmen, you only spam sharpshooters if you're going to do it. But yeah, the mid-tier crossbowmen, mid-tier cavalry, and even these 2 are okay. They're not bad. So I think this again is an S tier faction. They have access to the amazing strategic positioning of it. They aren't facing the strongest factions in the world, and generally the factions they are fighting are busy fighting other people. They can take advantage of that. They have the extra lords, and their unit rosters are great. So let's quickly take a look at this now. Do we want to change this? I think Vlaindia is the best faction in the game. Do I want to put the Khuzaits up here? Like that? I feel like S tier is so good though. So like maybe I'll do something like this. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. Do any of the Imperial factions go down to the B tier? I like the Battanians being C and the Sturgians, God rest their souls, being D tier. Like, that's good. The Aseri being B tier, I think, is fair. Do I think the Aseri are as good as the Empire? No. And I think this is good. Do I think the Southern Empire? Yeah, I think it is, because they just kind of outmuster. When they start conquering lands, because I just don't expand fast enough compared to the Southern Empire, I think they just get access to more expansion, considering where they are and who's fighting who. So yeah, this is going to be my tier list. Let me know in the comments if you guys agree, disagree, and I'll see you guys in the next one.